Hello everyone. So in the previous videos, we have been discussing about the internals of the JavaScript. Now we will tilt a bit towards browser, how the browser typically uses JavaScript. So we'll delve more a bit into the functionality of the browser itself. Now, before we understand all these concepts, we need to understand few basic concepts of the web. So there are a few fundamentals that I will cover in this video and in the upcoming videos, in the next videos. Then I will delve more into the concepts of the web, how web basically renders the page, how web uses all the technologies. So you will come across few of these terminologies. So one of these terminologies that you will frequently come across is W3C. So if you Google W3C, you will come across their website. So W3C stands for World Wide Web Consortium. So as consortium means an association, so World Wide Web Consortium, or as it's called W3C, because there are three W's. So this is an association of, you can say, association of companies, association of developers, association of web enthusiasts, and it was founded by Tim Berners-Lee, who is also the co-founder of internet. Now, the question is, what does W3C do? What is the purpose of this association? So W3C sets up standards. That's all that they do. Now, why do they set standards? That is something that we are going to discuss. But this standard they set for web. So they set some standards for web. And now, in future, if anyone is developing anything, a technology that is going to use web, they have to stick to these standards. Now you will come across a lot of standards. So one of these standards you will come across is HTML. You will have heard of this. Another of these standards is CSS. You might have heard of something called as WebSockets, then SVGs. So these are all standards of web, and these are set by W3C. W3C is the organization that sets these standards. So once you have these standards set, now doesn't matter what Google is doing with, let's say, Chrome. So Chrome is going to use only this technology. Now, if you have, let's say, Firefox, so Firefox also has to use these standards that have been set by W3C. So whatever technology, browser, or any interface is going to develop regarding the web, they have to stick to the standards of W3C. So I hope the concepts around the W3C are clear. Now, moving further after W3C, let's understand a bit about a standard or SGML. So SGML is also a standard. If we Google SGML, so SGML, as you can read the definition of it, it's an international standard for defining of markup languages. So SGML in itself is not a markup language. What's a markup language we'll discuss further. But SGML, just keep this in mind, SGML in itself is not a markup language, but SGML in itself is a standard. SGML in itself is a standard set by who? Of course, W3C. So W3C sets the SGML standards for defining a markup language. So if any markup language has to be developed by anyone, it has to follow the rules that have been set by SGML. So this is any markup language. any markup language has to follow the rules that have been set by markup language. Now, what is markup language? Let's go through that as well. So as you can read the definition here, a markup language is a set of rules that defines how to layout and presentation of text and images should appear in a digital document. So markup language basically is just a rules. Markup language lets you provide rules that any interface, it could be a browser or any other interface, will follow and display the results accordingly. I hope that's clear. So now this brings us to HTML. So what is HTML? HTML is a markup language. So all HTML does is it lets us provide a set of rules. So let's say if I say P, then any interface rendering this HTML, so it could be a browser, understands this rule from HTML and knows whatever is between these tags. So browser understands that this is a P tag and it has to be rendered as a paragraph. Now, if I give the same thing, let's say in H1 header. Again, this is an HTML rule and the browser understands that this has to be displayed as an H1. I hope you're a bit familiar with the HTML concepts already, so I'm not going deeper into what these tags are. Now, there are some other markup languages as well. You would have come across something called as XHTML or XML. So there are different markup language, but in the modern era, the most ones that is used is HTML with the version 5 and ahead. So I hope the HTML is clear as well. What is an HTML basically? So HTML is just a markup language. Now coming to the browser part. So I create HTML in an .html file. So I feed this file to the browser. Now there is a set of processes that this browser undertakes, takes this HTML, that is the markup language, and then displays something on the browser, on the view, on the UI accordingly. So what are these processes? That is something that we are going to discuss in the further videos. The idea of this video is to understand the holistic view and the more of the fundamentals clearly. So I hope that the conceptual idea of this is clear. That I feed something to the browser with an .html file and the browser takes that HTML file, do something processes. There are a lot of processes involved. You will come across something called as DOM, rendering, painting. And then finally, as a result of all these processes, something is displayed that you see typically in the browser. So if I see this, or if I see this is the result of processes that the browser undergoes onto the rules that are defined in this HTML file, and finally this is what is displayed. So I hope that clears the overall picture what happens in the background. Now obviously the interesting part of this is the processes, and that's something that I'm going to cover in the upcoming videos. So if you have any questions, drop in the comments. I will get back to you. And before we wrap up the video, just another quick thing. So you would have come across something called as Let me clear this first. Okay. So you would have sometimes come across something called as HTML. So HTML is same as .html. There isn't much difference. Earlier operating systems, as they used to have less processing power and everything, so a four-letter word used to be too much for them. So that is why they used to go with the three-letter word, that is .html. But nowadays, as operating systems and everything have a lot of power at hand, so HTML, processing a four-letter word is not much of a concern. So .html can be processed, and I don't see HTML being used nowadays at all. So you should stick to the standard of .html. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions, queries, drop me in the comments. I'll get back to you. And stay tuned. I will be uploading more videos on the processes that the browser undertakes to take this rule set from HTML and finally display into the browser. And I just remembered one more thing, so let me cover that as well. So you might have come across a terminology called polyfills. Now, what are polyfills basically? So let's go back to our standards. So as we earlier mentioned, we have something called as standards set by w3c, and then you have the browsers that have to stick to their standard while defining their engine, while defining their mechanisms and everything. Now, typically, there were issues in the way Microsoft used to design the IE browsers, Internet Explorer. And Internet Explorer did not adhere completely to the W3 standards. There were a few things that were missing. Now, the thing is, Chrome and Firefox in most of the scenarios used to adhere to these scenarios. Now, the thing is, if developer wanted to use that feature, now that would work in Chrome, that would work in Firefox, but that didn't work in IE. But there was a heavy usage of IE by the users, so developers would certainly like those features to be used by IE users as well, that is Internet Explorer users as well. So that is where developers used to write their own functionality that would mimic that missing feature. So these functionalities written by developers were known as polyfills. So I hope that's clear. So these polyfills were quite famous for the Internet Explorers that used to be written. There were open source libraries written by various developers to cover those functionalities missing in the IE. Now with the launch of Edge by Microsoft, the Edge more or less resorts to the standards of W3C. So the use of polyfills has become now more or less obsolete. It might still be used in some scenarios, but typically there is a very less usage of polyfills nowadays. But that's the history of the polyfills. So an interesting thing that came across my mind before I wrapped up this video. Again, thanks for watching, and if there's anything, drop me in the comments. I will reply to your comments if there are any doubts or anything. Thank you for watching, and do stay tuned for more interesting videos. I'm going to cover more on how browser renders the HTML rules and finally displays the UI. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.